This is 8-1A, all about right triangle trig. Hopefully you've seen this before in geometry. Just a bit of new information. So hopefully you remember that given a right triangle with some angle, call that angle theta, we can find the sine, cosine, and tangent of that angle in a right triangle using SOHCAHTOA, right? So sine means opposite over hypotenuse. Okay, and then cosine and tangent mean adjacent hypotenuse, opposite adjacent. Okay, hopefully you know that, and we'll get to writing all of these in. What is new to you is this part, the reciprocal trig functions. Okay, that you may have seen before, you may not, just depends on where you're coming from. All right, and so sine has a reciprocal function cosecant, and all that means is that it's equal to hypotenuse over opposite. Okay, and then cosine is equal to adjacent over hypotenuse, the adjacent side. Adjacent means next to over hypotenuse. And then secant is cosine's reciprocal, and so you just flip hypotenuse over adjacent. Okay, tangent is opposite. This is our TOA part, opposite over adjacent. And then for cotangent, it's reciprocal. You just flip and you take adjacent over opposite. All right, this is something that you should be aware of. You should know that sine and cosecant are reciprocals. I remember it by saying S sine goes with C. The S's and C's go together. The S's and C's go together for cosine and secant, and then cotangent I can just remember because it has the word tangent in it. Okay, so these are reciprocals, not to be confused with inverse trig functions, inverse sine, inverse cosine, inverse tangent, inverse cosecant, etc., because those are used to find angle measures. We use the regular trig functions to find side lengths. We use the inverse to find angle measures. Okay? So we can apply this, right? So we're trying to solve for x. This side length we don't know. We know an angle. We actually know two angles. So we have a couple options here, but say that we want 26 degrees to be our reference angle, theta. Then which should we use, sine, cosine, or tangent? Noticing that we have the adjacent side and the hypotenuse, we should use cosine. Okay, cosine of 26 degrees equals adjacent over hypotenuse, x over 11. Okay, to get x by itself, we want to multiply both sides by 11. So we end up getting that 11 cosine of 26 equals x. Type this into your calculator. Make sure, put a star here, make sure you're in degrees. Make sure that your calculator is in degrees. And when you do that, you should get 9.9 for your side length x. All right, this is a trig function, so this is not multiplication. It's not cosine times 26. It's cosine of 26 degrees, kind of like a logarithm. We are evaluating a function. All right, what about this one? We don't know our angle this time, but we know the side lengths. We know the adjacent and the hypotenuse side lengths, so we can start by setting out the same way. Cosine of some angle that we don't know, cosine of x equals adjacent over hypotenuse. And now, in order to get this x by itself, we don't just divide by cosine, remember, because this is not multiplication. Because it's a function relationship, we need to take the inverse function of cosine. So we actually need to take the cosine, inverse cosine of both sides, inverse cosine of x equals the inverse cosine of 6/10, and then the inverse cosine of cosine, those undo each other, and this x can just be now by itself. Okay, plug this into your calculator, and you should get 53.1 degrees for your angle measure. Make sure that you're in degrees for this, for your calculator, otherwise you'll get the wrong answer. Okay. Last one, word problem. Ramp 24 feet long, rises to a platform. So the ramp, here's the ramp, it rises to a platform, and that platform is 20 feet off the ground, so that's our height, 20 feet. We want to know what is the angle of elevation. So really, we just have a triangle. Thankfully, they've given us a picture to work with. We just want to know this missing angle given its opposite and its adjacent side. So we can take the tangent of x, and that's equal to the opposite. Oh, excuse me. This is the hypotenuse, isn't it? So instead of taking tangent, we want to take the trig function that represents opposite and hypotenuse. So we want to take sine. Okay, equals 20 over 24. We got to take the inverse sine of both sides, so we end up with the inverse sine of 20 over 24 is equal to x. Evaluate this in your calculator, and you should get 56.4 degrees for x. Okay, so there may be questions where you're given a triangle and you're just asked to list out its 6 trigonometric functions, in which case you would just put them as fractions. It's very straightforward. Okay, take a look at your practice and let me know what questions you have.